Chapter 3. The Greenhouse Glow. Aiden reached the foot of the hill just after the last color of evening had faded from the night sky, and he stood for a quiet minute to listen to the ocean below. The clear water kept a steady rhythm against the rocks, even and patient, and the gentle sound gave him the same easy feeling he remembered from the first night in town. Up on the rise, the greenhouse waited like a calm lantern, its glass panes catching the pale, gentle light that still floated above the ocean. He held his sketchbook to his chest and breathed in the salt and the scent of damp earth that traveled down from the garden path. Mira had sent a short note that afternoon asking if he might like to visit when the moon came up. Her message had been simple and warm, only a few lines and a small drawing of a fern leaf, and he had smiled when he read it because it felt like an open doorway. Now he placed his palm on the old wooden rail and began to climb, taking his time on the worn steps, watching the glow grow clearer through the trees. By the time he reached the top, the town below had settled into its evening quiet calm, and the greenhouse shone with a soft life of its own. The glass panes were not perfectly even, and that gave the gentle light a gentle ripple, as if it were breathing. Aiden paused at the doorway and saw Mira through the round window pane, moving among the wooden benches with a small watering can. She noticed him, lifted her hand in greeting, and then opened the doorway so that the warm green scent rushed out to meet him. "Welcome," she murmured, and her voice carried the same steady kindness it had under the awning in the rain. He stepped inside and felt the mild warmth on his face and hands, and he closed his eyes for a second to enjoy it. Green leaves crowded above him in friendly ways. Climbing vines crossed from wooden post to wooden post like lines on a page. Clay flower pots in many sizes sat on wooden benches, each with a small tag written in careful script. A garden path of round pebbles curved between the benches to a shallow water pool at the far end where a few drops fell at long intervals from a joint in the glasswork frame. Every gentle sound in the greenhouse seemed to be part of one calm song. Mira set the watering can aside and offered him a teacup of chamomile tea that she had kept warm on a little hot plate in the corner. The steam rose in a thin stream, and the teacup felt pleasant in his hands. "Thank you for coming," she murmured. "I wanted you to see how the greenhouse feels at night when the quiet calm is complete." He answered that he was glad to be there and that the room already felt like a friendly companion. Mira smiled and showed him where he could set his satchel without disturbing anything. She told him to take all the time he needed, and that if he liked, she would keep to her chores and let him draw. That sounded perfect. He opened his sketchbook, found a fresh page, and stood near the water pool to catch the way the gentle light moved on the surface. The glow from the lanterns and the moon outside mixed together and made the clear water look like a sheet of slow silver. He tried a few lines, then a few more, and soon his hand began to move with the easy pace he always hoped for. Nearby, Mira worked with gentle attention, checking soil with 2 fingers, turning a small flower pot so that a leaf could face a better direction. wiping a glass pane with a cloth until it shone. She did not speak for several minutes, and he was grateful for that simple respect. He drew the curve of a fern that bent over the water pool and the tiny ring that formed every time a drop fell. He added the edges of the wooden benches and the faint pattern in the glasswork above. At last he studied and saw Mira watching him with a small smile. She set the cloth down and came to stand beside him. "Is it what you hoped for?" she inquired. He answered that it was more. He said the greenhouse gave shape to the silence in a way he liked very much. Mira nodded and said that the place had rules that were not written, and that one of them was that the quiet calm here was a thing you could touch. She lifted a finger and pointed to a row of dark flower buds near the back. "Those will open later," she murmured. "They do not care for company during the day. They prefer a still night, the softest kind of gentle light and no sudden movement." Aiden inquired about their names, and she gave both the common names the neighbors used and the long names she had learned in school. He liked hearing both at once because it made the plants feel like old friends who also had full stories. He told her that he had never met flowers that asked for silence as if it were water. Mira answered that was exactly right. She said that some of them had learned to bloom when the world rested, and that the greenhouse tried to honor that habit. She moved away to check a small clock near the doorway, then lowered one of the lanterns to make the gentle light a little softer. Through the roof glass panes the moon began to show, pale and steady, and the garden took on a gentle blue edge. They both listened as the drops at the joint slowed and then stopped, and the water pool became very still. Aiden put his pencil down and simply stood with his hands on the sketchbook, breathing with the greenhouse. After a while, Mira poured a second teacup and handed it to him. She leaned against the wooden bench and looked around in a way that told him she never grew tired of this sight. He inquired if she ever read in here at night. She answered yes. Sometimes she brought a small book and turned the pages very slowly. She did not like to read stories that pulled her away from the greenhouse. She liked recipe books and plant guides and short letters from her aunt that still arrived now and then. Aiden murmured that letters were his favorite kind of reading when he did not want to leave a place. He said he liked how the mind stayed near the chair and the gentle light in the teacup. When they fell silent, the greenhouse filled the space with its own gentle sound. Mira checked the clock again and smiled. "It is time," she said, and she gestured to the row of flower buds at the back. They stood together at a respectful distance. The flower buds were long and pale, closed like fingers. The night air around them felt a little cooler. Aiden watched and tried to keep his breathing slow. At first he thought nothing was happening, and then he saw the tip of one flower bud loosen by the width of a hair. Another followed, then another. The greenhouse seemed to lean in. A thin seam appeared along a petal and then widened with steady patience. Within a few minutes, a small star of white showed at the center of the first flower. Then another star and another, until the row had a quiet shimmer to it, as if a piece of the night sky had come to rest on the shelf. Mira did not speak. Aiden did not move. He felt the tingle he sometimes felt when a drawing found its line. He opened the sketchbook without looking down and set the pencil to the page like a respectful guest. His hand moved in small strokes to record the stages of the opening. Later he would add more, but for now he wanted a record of the time and the calm. After a while Mira exhaled and smiled. She whispered that it was good to share this with someone who cared. He answered that he was honored to be there and that he would remember this night whenever he needed a reminder of the right pace of things. She touched the edge of the wooden bench with 2 fingers as if to say thank you to the wood. They stood together for a while longer and then walked back to the wooden bench near the water pool. The greenhouse felt different now, not louder, only more awake in a soft way. Small insects tapped on the glasswork and drifted away. A breeze from the ocean found a path through a gap in the glass panes and carried a faint touch of salt into the green leaves. Aiden turned a page and began a broader drawing of the greenhouse. He placed the water pool at the bottom of the picture and let the pebbled garden path curve up and right. He set the wooden benches along the sides, included the tall frame, and let the climbing vines cross where they wished. He drew Mira as a figure at the far table with her hand near a flower pot. Not a portrait, only a note of her care. His lines were simple but sure. Every few minutes he lifted his head to rest his eyes on a single leaf or on the blue face of the moon through the roof. Time slowed. It did not stop, but it forgot to run. Outside the town was very quiet now, and the lighthouse on the far point sent its patient beam across the ocean and then away again. Aiden inquired how she first learned about the flowers that preferred the night. Mira rested her hip against the wooden bench and thought for a moment. She answered that when she was a child she could not sleep on warm nights, and her aunt would sometimes take her out to the greenhouse and let her sit on a stool while the older woman tidied. She would stare at the flower buds and try to be as still as the flower pots. One night she looked down and realized that a flower had opened beside her without making any sound at all, and it felt like a secret shared only with her. Since then she had liked the idea that important things often happen quietly. Aiden listened closely. He said he had always felt better in rooms where he could hear a page turn or a kettle click rather than the chatter of a loud street. He told her he had left the city because he wanted to see if his drawings could learn from silence. She answered she thought they already had. She pointed to the study of the water pool and the rings and said that the sense of time in that page felt true. He did not know how to answer, and so he nodded and said he would try to be worthy of the greenhouse. Mira laughed softly and said the greenhouse did not ask for worth, only attention and kindness. Later they walked the garden path together. She showed him a shelf where the green leaves held drops like tiny pearls. She showed him a cupboard of notebooks where she recorded the first bloom of each season and the dates of new cuttings. She returned the notebooks to the shelf and stood without speaking. Aiden felt a pleasant heaviness in his limbs, the kind that comes when the body knows it can rest. He inquired if they might switch off the electric lanterns for a few minutes and let only the moon and a small candle guide them. Mira agreed at once. She turned the switches and lit a candle in a clear cup on the table. The flame rose and steadied. The greenhouse changed again. Edges softened. Shadows grew friendly. The stars outside seemed closer. Aiden sat on the low wooden bench and placed the sketchbook on his knees. He did not draw now. He set the pencil aside and just looked. Mira sat near him and did the same. They did not need to talk about what they were doing. The candle gave a thin halo to the rim of the nearest flower pot. A petal caught a pale glow like frost. The water pool held a small trembling light that looked like a coin under clear water. For a long time they kept still and let the greenhouse speak. He felt the draw of sleep at the edges of his mind and did not resist. She rested her head against the wooden post behind her and closed her eyes for a minute, then opened them again with a small smile that said she was present. He thought he could sit there forever and that the moment would still feel fresh. At last Mira blew out the candle and turned the lanterns back on, and the greenhouse returned to its gentle clarity. She inquired if he would like a small cutting to take home. He answered he would love that, but only if it did not trouble the plant. She picked a healthy trailing vine and chose a place where a new root would form easily. With a clean pair of scissors, she made a careful snip and placed the cutting in a glass with a bit of clear water. She wrote a small label with the name and the date and added a simple note that said "From the quiet hour." Aiden felt touched by the words and by the trust. He answered he would take good care of it and would let her know when the first root appeared. She said she would like that very much. They tidied the table, rinsed the teacups, and gathered their things. Before they left, Mira stood near the row of night flowers and gave them a last look as if to say rest well. And Aiden followed her lead with a small bow of his head that felt natural in the greenhouse. The doorway gave a soft click as it closed. Outside, the night air was cool and smelled of wet leaves and ocean. The town below lay quiet, calm, each window pane a little square of comfort. They walked the garden path down the hill slowly, not because they were tired, but because the pace felt right. Aiden carried the glass with the cutting in both hands the way one carries a candle. Mira kept her hands in her pockets and matched his steps. They did not talk much. Every now and then one of them pointed to a small thing, a moth near a lantern, a cat slipping along a fence, a thin cloud crossing the face of the moon. When they reached the lower street, they turned toward the ocean and listened for a moment. The waves sounded like a long breath taken by someone who knows there is no rush. Mira murmured she would walk him to the corner and then head home. At the corner they paused. They smiled at the idea that this night would live inside the sketchbook and inside her notes and inside the clear water where the first root would soon appear. A light breeze moved through the street and made the chime at the doorway sing once. They said good night and agreed to meet in 2 evenings at the cafe, not to make a plan, only to enjoy the simple habit of sharing a cup. Aiden watched her walk away for a moment, then turned toward his own street. carrying the glass as if it were a small friend. Back in his room, he set the cutting on the windowsill where it would see the morning. He filled the glass to the right height, placed a folded paper beneath it to catch any moisture, and wrote the date and the note on a small card. He put the sketchbook on the table and opened to the first page he had made by the water pool. He studied the rings and the fern and the faint lines of the wooden benches and felt content. He added a few words along the bottom to remind himself of the pace of the night. He closed the book, made a simple note in his own journal about the candle and the way the flower opened, and then washed the teacups and set them to dry. He opened the window pane a little to bring in the ocean air and then placed a record on his small player. The piano piece began at low volume and he lay back on the bed with his hands folded. He watched the ceiling and listened to the steady left hand and the light right hand and thought about the water pool and the ring of clear water and the patient opening of the flower buds. Sleep arrived in a clean way, like a tide that takes the sand by inches. Before he drifted off, he pictured the greenhouse from outside. A quiet boat of glasswork on a hill with a single candle inside. And he pictured Mira leaning over a flower pot with her steady touch. And he felt grateful that a simple note with a small drawing of a fern leaf had opened a doorway to such a night. He slept well and deeply, and in the early hours when the town was most quiet calm, the cutting on the sill sat in its glass and began the slow work of sending out the first hint of a root, as if the greenhouse still reached across the hill